Hi everyone, welcome back. So I wanted to do a beach or basically a wave pour on a cheese board. So I got this one from IKEA, and be kind because it's my first one. So I'm showing you the colors I used. So for the deep blue, I used a mixture of Blue Moon and Twilight Orchid from Colourarte. That's the resin line. And then I used Mermaid and Surf's Up for the aqua and the lighter teal. And then I mixed Celestial Sky, which is also from Colourarte. All of them are from Colourarte except for one. One of them is Indian Ocean, which is from Woody's Goodies. So I mixed Celestial Sky with Indian Ocean for the color closest to the waves. And all of this is just sheer experimentation. So I know a lot of people like to use flat colors or sparkly colors for their beach pours, but I didn't want to, and I figured since it was my beach pour, if I wanted sparkle, then by all means I should have it, right? So for the waves, I was torn between using white pigment and white Alumilite dye. I don't know which one is better, but I used white Alumilite dye. It's opaque and you only need like a couple of drops. Too much can make your epoxy stringy. So I taped up the back with painter's tape so that when the epoxy drips, because it's going to, I can heat up the drips with the heat gun and get them off that way. So one thing I will say is when you're pouring over a wood surface, wood is porous, and so sometimes as your epoxy settles, you may have an occasional like bubble almost that opens up a little part in the epoxy, and I really let that bother me, and I ended up doing a second coat on this board, and I didn't like the way the second coat turned out compared to the first. It's still pretty, but I think going forward I'm just going to let that be part of the process. It's usually on the sides, so it's not too big of a deal. So I'm going to start off by putting the Blue Moon and the Twilight Orchid on the handle, and I just sort of mix the two colors throughout. One of them is a deep blue and one of them almost has a little bit of a violet hue to it, so I think it provides a good balance. And these are from the Rezinarte pigment line that Leslie has, and so they're honestly some of the most beautiful resin pigments I've ever seen. So here I'm trying to show you the colors and I'm completely out of frame. So right there that I'm just showing you is the opaque pigment dye. So I'm basically mixing everything up together. So I'm just mixing up my colors, but when we start, I'll do the handle with the Blue Moon and the Twilight Orchid, and then, excuse me, after that I will use the Mermaid, which is the more teal color. And I'm just trying to make sure the edges are covered because I think at this point I'm using a ton of epoxy just to pour it on there. So, but you kind of just have to be okay with that. I think I used about an ounce of epoxy for this board. Well, it's just a little bit of a handle, but to get good coverage, you kind of have to be okay with using a lot of it. But what I did is with my finger, my gloved finger, I went over the edges to make sure that they were fully covered, and so anything extra we added was just sort of reinforcing that. But even then, I had one spot where it almost looked like on the edge like I had touched it with my finger, but I hadn't. It was just that the porous aspects of the wood, it sort of breathes underneath the epoxy. So that's just something to be prepared for. You just have to decide how perfect you want the side to be. I decided if the top looks great, if there's an occasional little spot on the side, I'm not going to lose sleep over that. I think you just waste so much materials sometimes when you're too picky about some of that stuff. So that is Blue Moon that we are starting with there. As you see, I basically am just trying to cover the edges, so as we add the future colors, we have plenty of coverage on the sides since we had a lot of the Blue Moon. Just wanted to use it to help the epoxy move. I did not put like a base layer of epoxy down on the board. Usually, like if I do a resin piece, I will put something down first to help everything move around. But I didn't do that because I didn't want it to cause the color to fade. So now I'm just kind of filling in with that epoxy. And now this is Twilight Orchid, which is a gorgeous color. And it does have a little bit of a violet hue, which I like. So that's why I wanted to use it mixed with Blue Moon, because the Blue Moon kind of makes sure that it looks like a true blue, but it still has a little bit of a violet tone to it. And I'm coming down a little bit further with this color just to graduate the colors. So now I'm adding Mermaid. Mermaid's kind of a greenish teal, also Colourarte. All of these are Colourarte so far. It's a beautiful color, and it really, like, these colors work so well for a beach pour, which is awesome because I had no idea how they would play together because I had never done one. So it was fun to try them out. One of the things that I do with Colourarte, Primary Elements pigments and the resin art, is I usually will mix a little bit and put it on the lid so that I can know what it truly is going to mix up like, because sometimes when you're dealing with dry pigments, the actual pigment color doesn't look the same as what it looks like mixed up. That one is called Surf's Up. Another favorite. I love the teal color. It's like a bright, happy teal. So I'm just popping some bubbles here to also keeping the epoxy kind of loose by keeping it heated up. Now here is where I mixed Celestial Sky, which is a resin art, Colourarte pigment, with Indian Ocean, which is one of my favorite colors from Woody's Goodies. It's like almost like a seafoam green, but it has some color shift to it, so it's really beautiful. And I honestly think it gave me the perfect color blue for kind of graduating from a dark to a light right before the waves. And as you can see, I have had some epoxy accidents where I have dropped epoxy on the part of the board that we are not trying to cover. So the way I fixed that is I just put a little acetone on a paper towel and I got it up before it dried. The epoxy we're using is food safe, so it's not a terrible thing if it gets on there, but obviously that's not where I want it. So you'll see me later correct that, but in case I forget to tell you, because let's be honest, messing with epoxy, you're going to get it places where you are not looking for it to go sometimes. So so now I'm just filling in where I have extra epoxy to try to blend things a little bit. And we're going to do our waves in a minute. So for the waves, I will add a thin layer of clear epoxy between that color that we're finishing with and where we want the waves to go. And what that does is when you take your heat gun and you blow the waves over, when the white rolls over that clear, it helps create some lacing and cell effects that you may not have had if you just ran the white over the color. So that's why you add the clear. You're basically kind of creating some interference for the white. So that's kind of fun. And so when we do that, you also have to give up wanting it to be perfect. So I'm looking at this now thinking, you know, it's not a perfect line, but it is a kind of a nice slanted, straight looking line. I guess slanted and straight are completely opposite, right? But when you hit it with the heat, it's gonna kind of do what it wants. And so if you struggle with wanting things to be symmetrical like I do, you might have to loosen up a little bit when it comes to doing a resin pour where you're trying to create ocean waves, because ocean waves are not symmetrical. It's one of the fun things about the ocean. So this again is Alumilite white dye, and I put a little bit too much in there, so my epoxy was almost a little gummy, which made me a little nervous. But the good thing is, if you don't like it, you can always pour over it. So the heat gun I will link in the description box. I'm using an attachment there to kind of focus the heat in one spot, or in a narrower spot. And the heat gun that I use comes with attachments, so that's kind of nice. And I'm being very careful because I've never done this before, and I'm trying to make sure I don't create massive destruction. So I found when I torched over the waves, it opened up the lacing in the cells quite a bit. And you can see that I'm having a compulsive desire to fix that wave where it's a little too graduated. And I really thought about putting a little wave up in the darker blue part, but I was really afraid to make it look really muted. So I decided not to do that. So here I am adding one more white line to create more waves. And I think I honestly end up regretting that, because I was pretty happy with the way it went. And even looking at it from this view and not when you're working on it, I'm like, it was really fine. You didn't really need to add the extra wave. But I tend to overwork things. And I also sometimes mess things up trying to make them perfect. So I'm learning that the goal of art is not perfection. But this actually turns out really nice looking. I really liked the way it turned out for my first time. I expected to maybe hate it a little bit, but I really liked it. So where I messed up is after this dried, excuse me, around the handle, like I told you, the wood will breathe, and also the epoxy continues to move. So as the epoxy continued to move, it moved a little bit down the sides of that board, and you could see the board a little bit in like sort of a transparent way. And I was like, oh, I want to cover that up. But it's the side, like it didn't really matter. And so what I would do differently, and I did when I did a recent one, is instead of pouring over it and doing another layer of waves, which a lot of people do every single time, I think I would leave it as is. And if the only issue is a little dot on the side of the handle, that's not the thing that people are going to focus on anyway. So I would just self-disclose, if you have a customer or something, that this is what it looks like. This is where the wood breathed through the epoxy, and see if they take issue with it. And if they do, then maybe touch up that spot and do a clear coat. But I don't think going forward that I will compromise the whole design just to cover up one spot on a handle. So that's my 2 cents. I'm learning to relax a little bit and not be so particular that I actually end up overworking pieces. But I hope you enjoyed this journey with me. This is my very first one. I would like to do a bloom on a cheese board, or a bloom recipe painting. I don't know if I'll be able to get that done anytime as soon as I wanted to, but I really enjoy doing these. So I will end up putting them on our Etsy shop. But if you are interested in one, let us know in our email below. Our social media links are also below, so we'd love for you to follow us on social media. And if you are currently a subscriber, we appreciate that so much. If you're not, we would love for you to become a subscriber. Hit that notification bell so you receive the notifications when we record new videos. We do fluid art and resin art, obviously, and I'm also a Tumblr artist, so we do post kind of a wide span of things. So it may not all pique your interest, but my husband does resin art sometimes as well, so sometimes we do things together. And so we would just love to share our journey with you. And you can see I'm real tempted to keep overworking this board. What I did for the drips on the bottom is after this cured, I took a heat gun and with the same attachment that I blew the waves out, I heated up the tape on the back, and ever so slowly in small little sections, I pull the tape off and it pulls the drips off. And it honestly did really, really well. And then if you have a little bit of a rough edge, just take some fine grit sandpaper and do your best to only sand the edge where the epoxy is, and you'll get a nice clean finish in the back. It looks really nice. So I hope you enjoyed our little journey. And again, thank you so much for watching. Sorry about my scratchy throat allergies. And have a great day. Thank you, everyone.